The JCC's book and author series is designed to present writers with compelling stories, both fiction and nonfiction, across a broad spectrum of human experiences, emotions, challenges, and successes. Tonight's conversation is sponsored by the JCC J-Care Social Action Committee. Today is the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The committee was started last May in response to the murder of George Floyd, and the widespread reaction that forced the country to confront the plethora of social injustices which continue to negatively impact the lives of Black Americans. Dr. Gaston's talk tonight promises to educate us about the distressing reality of mass incarceration and re-entry after prison, and will provide us with actions we can take to make positive change. Dr. Herron Gaston is the senior pastor of Summerfield United Methodist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Pre-Law and a Master of Arts in Social Sciences from Florida A&M. He holds a Master of Divinity and Master of Sacred Theology from Yale University and a Doctor of Ministry from Andover Newton Seminary at Yale University. Dr. Gaston is also the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Bridgeport, an administrative arm of the Mayor's Office, where he oversees the day-to-day operations of Connecticut's largest city. Former President and Chairman of the Civil Service Commission, he was the youngest person to serve as on the commission in the city's history. Currently a third-year law student at Quinnipiac University School of Law, he serves as the president of the Christian Legal Society, the vice president of the Catholic Society, vice president of the Black Law Students Association, and is the chairperson for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Dr. Gaston's first book was From Yale to Jail, which tells his personal story. His newest book, A Call to Action, Practically Reversing the Trends of Mass Incarceration, and he will be talking about this tonight. I heard Dr. Gaston speak at the Let My People Go Yale Newton Seminary conference, also partnered with the NAACP this winter. And I was so impressed, I said, I have to have him come and speak to us at the JCC. And he was so gracious and immediately said he would come. And I'm really looking forward to have you hear him tonight. I'm sure you'll find him as inspiring as I did. And I also want to introduce you to Cheryl Bader, who will be our moderator tonight. Cheryl is the Clinical Associate Professor of Law at Fordham University School of Law. Her teaching and research focuses on criminal law, judges and judicial, harassment, and expert witnesses. She also has an interest in the injustice of the prison population than mass incarceration. Cheryl received her JD from Hofstra and her LLM from Columbia. She clerked for Judge Samuel Alito and then Michael Chertoff. She taught at the New England School of Law prior to Fordham. Cheryl and her husband, Stephen, are longtime JCC members, former board members, and generous supporters. Cheryl says the JCC was the place she came to meet people when she was new to Stanford. She's been an active volunteer involved in many, many programs, from Mitzvah Days to Zahal Shalom, and her children basically grew up here. Actually, she and I have served on quite a few committees together. We couldn't remember them all when we were talking about this. So now I'm going to hand you over to Herron Gaston and Cheryl Bader. Enjoy.
So I too want to add my thanks for your being here, joining us today, sharing yourself, your very compelling story, and having this important conversation with us. I found your personal narrative really to be quite courageous, and how you laid bare, that the vulnerability and the indignities of our criminal, I'll call it our criminal adjudicative process. I used to say criminal justice system. but I think particularly when it comes to, brown and Black people, that, justice is just a word that, really shouldn't be in that language. So, and, for those of you who haven't had a chance, I actually have the book. And it's really, it's a short but very powerful read, The Darkest Night, an incarceration memoir from jail to Yale. And, so I just really highly recommend it. And thought that you could just, start out maybe by telling us a little bit about that personal journey and how that brought you to the research that you've been doing now, and to develop your blueprint for how we can reverse the trends in mass incarceration.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much for having me tonight. I want to give a special thanks to Connie for the invitation, and to Cheryl for your graciousness of reaching out, and for you helping to facilitate this on tonight, and also to Nancy for the tech help, and for all of you who thought it not robbery to give up some of your time tonight to listen to me. So Cheryl, I'll kind of go the long route, and then I'll sort of bring it home for you. But I just want to give some context and background for my interest in criminal justice reform. At the commencement of my collegial academic journey at Florida A&M University, I had the unique opportunity to work in the governor's office in the state of Florida as a gubernatorial fellow. I was one of 11 students from the 11 state universities in Florida to be handpicked and selected by the governor, who was then Charlie Crist, who is now a congressman, who had me to work on a special project in his office entitled The Social Status of Black Men and Boys. And specifically, this committee was designed to help curtail Black and brown young men in particular from being ensnared into the juvenile justice system in the state of Florida, and then later graduate into the larger criminal justice system for disciplinary kind of issues that they may have been experiencing in school. And so as a result of that, initially there was about 60% of our students across the 67 counties in Florida that had some level of contact with the judicial system by virtue of them getting in trouble at school and then sort of being handed over to the juvenile justice system. And that really pained and grieved my heart as someone who come from an environment and background where I know that all too often I've experienced the ease with which young Black and brown men in particular fall victim to the criminal justice system and want to really make a change. And so as a result of that, we started working with high school principals, middle school principals, and elementary school principals, and trying to find a way to have the principals and assistant principals to deal with disciplinary concerns, opposed to turning it over to the school resource officers who were police officers, and designed to sort of deal with disciplinary issues on campus in a different way. Instead of putting students in in-school suspension or detention, they would put the students in jail for minor infractions. And so we were able to lessen how many students were going into the criminal justice system or the judicial system, the juvenile justice system, and diminish that by 25% the first year, and then followed by 27% and 32%. So we were able to significantly reduce the school to prison pipeline. So that's where my interest in criminal justice actually started. And then I had the opportunity also to work in the Florida Department of Corrections as a legislative analyst, working directly under the commissioner of the Department of Corrections, helping to lead the reentry program, helping formerly incarcerated people reintegrate back into society, whether that is helping them to plug into social programs such as getting an ID, getting a birth certificate, finding employment, so on and so forth. And so as that just continued to develop, it continued to develop my passion for this work. And I had a calling to seminary and divinity school. And because Yale Divinity School was located in New Haven, but then also surrounded, for those of you who are familiar with the composition of Yale, it is a place with an abundant amount of resources, but just around Yale, you see pockets of extreme levels of poverty. And I thought that that mirrored the community that I came from, and I might be able to do some really amazing work there. And considering that the Divinity School had a focus on social justice and criminal justice reform, I found myself as a student at the Yale Divinity School. But to answer your question more precisely about sort of what brought me into the research, the questions that I would ask myself as a student at Yale that sort of guided my research is what would it look like for the church, for para-organizations and individuals along with the criminal justice system to look at the criminal justice system as a reforming institution opposed to a punitive institution where one gets into trouble and instead of throwing the key and locking people away, what would it look like to help to promote human flourishing by investing in opportunities for people to repair the harm that they may have caused by virtue of their infraction, instead of locking people up and throwing away the key and resigning them to a perpetual state of systemic poverty. I also would toy around with the question of what should the moral and compassionate response of individuals, churches, para-organization be towards formerly incarcerated individuals and who've been relegated to the margins, and what does a second chance truly look like? And you know, being a person of faith, I often would hear my grandmother say, you know, but for the grace of God, there goes I. And so wrestling with those questions as a person of faith also helped me to really dig deeper theologically in terms of asking the question about restorative justice and using biblical characters and instances within the biblical text where we see that it's replete with individuals who have endured persecution, hardship, who've been institutionalized, and you know, even people like Peter and John and Paul and Silas and folks like Jesus would be considered in the modern day context to be sort of crucified criminals and folks who would be labeled a felon and perhaps walking around with a scarlet letter. But yet these are some of the most luminary individuals that we're taught to look up to and to aspire towards. So that's what brought me to the work. But I also had my own personal experience with the criminal justice system. In 2010, I formerly worked at I was working at a youth camp at the University of South Florida. Subsequently, I was a camp counselor and was accused of sexual misconduct by a student in the program. I recall vividly on the night of October the 10th, I received a phone call from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that it reached out to me and said, Mr. Gaston, we just want to bring you to contact you to let you know that we received a phone call regarding improprieties that may have happened in the program that you worked in, and you are subject of our investigation. So I categorically denied the allegations as I spoke with the officer, and I recall, you know, invoking my Fifth Amendment privilege and indicated that I wanted to talk with counsel and that they should be in touch with my legal counsel. The officer continued to sort of badger me on the phone, and after I terminated the call, consistently called my phone back, to which I answered once, and I told the officer that I categorically deny the allegations. I would ask that you would speak with my attorney, and that I will not be responding to any questions that he would be asking. And so I got off the phone, and the next morning I went and talked to the dean of students at the time at Yale, and made him apprised of the phone call that I received. Was in his office, and he, along with myself, contacted the police department at the University of South Florida. And after having a conversation with one of the investigators, the investigator let the dean of students know that there was nothing for me to worry about, that I should, you know, go to school and return to classes as normal, and that they had concluded their investigation after having spoken with me, and so there's nothing to worry about. So at any rate, I continue to go to class as normal, and I didn't hear anything for at least the next several days, but I did contact an attorney at Parks and Crump, and Parks and Crump are notable attorneys in the state of Florida. In fact, Benjamin Crump is the one that's handling and leading the George Floyd's case currently. Daryl Parks told me to not worry and to just go to class, and if anything, that law enforcement will be in contact with his office directly. So I did what he told me to do, and I went to class. And I recall on November 4th, 2010, I was sitting in a pastoral care class at Yale, and the U.S. Marshals came onto the campus and arrested me in front of my peers. I was taken to the New Haven jail. Before I got there, the officers were hurling insults and saying that, you know, here it is, you are a Black man, and you've gotten into trouble, and we've had to come up here and pick your scrawny, you know, ASS up. So using very explicit language to refer to my having been arrested. At that time, I was about maybe 15, 20 pounds thinner than I am now. And the officers, you know, made comments towards that end in terms of my scrawny self and, you know, how dare I as a Black man, you know, get to Yale and then screw everything up. So I continued to just stay quiet while I was in the custody of the police, and eventually they took me to the New Haven jail. I was arraigned there and placed into their custody, and stayed there until Florida decided to come and get me. And I think Florida had about 90 days before they need to extradite me down. And close to the 90-day mark, I was extradited down to Florida, and then also spent some time incarcerated down in Florida. And it was about a 9 to 10 month stint in the criminal justice system. And it was a very difficult and tumultuous experience. Ultimately, the charges against me was dropped, and the student indicated that they had lied about the situation and was attempting to get law enforcement from the very beginning to see that it was a lie, and law enforcement continued to pursue me. And so I had good reason to believe that it was politically motivated, and considering the fact that I was an African-American male, it made it very easy for folks not to question the egregious nature of my arrest. But nonetheless, I bring that to your attention because there were several and also I was dismissed from Yale while I was incarcerated. The then dean of students, at the direction of the then dean of the Yale Divinity School, had him to send me a letter while I was incarcerated saying that if in fact the charges against you are true, then you are not fit for the ministry, and that Yale had made a decision to dismiss me. And so my case seemed to have been adjudicated in the court of public opinion, even before I had an opportunity to go before the judicial system to determine whether or not I was innocent or guilty. I bring that to your attention because in that same breath, there were several other students that I know of at the Yale Divinity School and Yale University in particular that have been accused of similar infractions. Those students were able to continue on with their education without there being any termination of them having, you know, to stop going to school while their case was pending in the court. And those students were not dismissed. And the difference that I can think about that's quite obvious is that ontologically they look different from me. Phenotypically, they look different from me. They were students not of color, but white students, white male students in particular. So there's where I really experienced sort of the desperate treatment in terms of the way that I was treated in that situation and the way that other students who don't look like me with a different pigmentation was treated. So that's sort of the story. If you want to know sort of the more nuts and bolts of that interaction, I have a book. It's available on Amazon, and the book is entitled The Darkest Night, an Incarceration Memoir from Jail to Yale.
So thank you for sharing that very personal story, and your narrative, as well as actually your scholarly work and your blueprint, you know, really do a very good job of laying out this disparate treatment, and, you know, this really unfortunate and pervasive history of systematic racism. And so, I myself, working, within the criminal adjudicative system, have, done a lot of thinking about this. And, there's lots of data out there that's been around, pre, George Floyd's murder, about how, judges, prosecutors, law enforcement, just as you were saying about the police, that, there is this, implicit bias and actually explicit bias that goes on. But, one study that I've actually shared with my students through, some work through the Marshall Project, is that even public defender offices, right? They've done studies that show that public defenders, so the lawyers that are there to, you think are there to help marginalized individuals, that they spend less time working on the representation of their Black clients than they do, when they have a white client. And so, it's just, such disturbing, evidence-based information. And, I'm just wondering, we've been talking now about, wholesale change and the need for sort of, wholesale change in our system. And then there's also the need for this sort of, incremental change and things that we can do as, both individuals and organizations. And I'm wondering if you, have any optimism around, the appetite now for reform of the system, and whether you think that, incremental change, will in fact, make a difference, and and what that pace might be.
Sure, that's a great question, and there's a lot there to unpack. But what I think personally is that change doesn't happen from the top down, but we see that change is happening from the bottom up. It's when the bottom starts to really make a lot of noise that the top sometimes listen. And I think that we are in a very unique place in our society right now, where more and more issues of injustice are being brought to the forefront. And I think that people are a little bit more keen and apt to listen. And so I think the time is ripe to have this kind of discussion in terms of wide-reaching and sweeping comprehensive reform in our criminal justice system, but then also to really talk about the big elephant in the room that makes most people squander around in their chair, and that is the issue of race. And I think that, this country in particular have been weak-willed in being able to have a very honest conversation about the issue of race and the ways in which it impacts all of us, whether you're white or whether you're Black, whether you're pink, yellow, or brown. And, the criminal justice system of today, we actually have more people that's institutionalized in our country today than we had in 1860 and 1890. And there are more African Americans and Latinos that are behind what I call the invisible institution today than there were in yesteryears. So you posit the question of whether or not we're making progress. I think that we've made some progress, but the more steps we've taken forward, we've also taken some steps backward. And I think that Dr. King said it most eloquently, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but that it bends towards justice. And sometimes we bend that arc in the direction of justice, and oftentimes we have a retraction of that arc as it bends backward. And I think that the criminal justice system is an example of that, and that we have a fiduciary, ethical, and moral responsibility to right side the wrong. I see that we have, over 1.8 million people are in some federal prison, or 1.1 million we have in our state prisons. 1 in 3 African Americans will be arrested in their lifetime. 4 out of, I believe, 6 Latinos, Latinas will be arrested in their lifetime. 1 in 14 whites will be arrested in their lifetime. And so those are very startling and gross statistics, and that being one of the freest countries in the world, we incarcerate more of our own than any other nation in the world. And the sad reality is the criminal justice system have a desperate impact on people. Once they go through the criminal justice system, they have a scarlet letter for the rest of their life, whether or not they committed a crime or not. Just the mere fact of being implicated is challenging. And I'm not sure how we fix it, but I think that some of the things that we could do personally is to make ourselves more aware of the realities of what's happening with our criminal justice system. And just because we can't see these individuals don't mean that they are not a part of a family, that they are not a part of a community, that they won't one day get out and come back into the community. And we need to be prepared for that, and to give people a decent shot and opportunity to repair the wrong perhaps that they've committed, and give them a clean slate so that they could be productive members of our society. So some of the tangible actions that come to mind first is getting to know someone who may be incarcerated or may have been incarcerated and who might be back out in the community, spending time listening to people. I think it's important, and I think there's something to be said about why the endowed creator gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we are more expedient to listen than we are to speak. And I think sometime when you hear someone's story, it allows you to imagine, or at least try to put yourself in that person's shoes. And I think that it opens us up to being more compassionate listeners and more compassionate human beings for the plight of others. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I think if you live in a community where you don't necessarily have to be confronted with the realities of dealing with formerly incarcerated people, try getting into the inner cities and making some connections there, and connecting, whether that's with churches, para organizations, whether it's with the local government that might have a reentry program, and start doing some volunteer work. And you'll definitely see the challenges that people are facing when they're trying to get their lives back together. I mean, I work in Bridgeport's largest city, and I can tell you that probably 60 to 70% of the folks in Bridgeport, and this is not an exaggeration by any stretch of the imagination, are just as impacted or have a relative that's just as impacted. I work with so many kids and so many people on a daily basis who are just trying to get back out there and to make a difference in society, and it's hard. They can't get an access to an ID card. Some of them are having challenges getting birth certificates. Some are having challenges getting employment. They're coming out of prison. Some have served 20 to 30 years in prison. It's a different world out there. They don't know how to use a cell phone. They don't know how to use the internet. Some of the skills that they had back then are sort of antiquated for the workforce today. They don't have those workforce technologies that they need to really be equipped to go to work. And many don't even have family members that they're connected to, because it's been 20 years since they've been removed from their families. And many of these folks are homeless and they're living on the street. They want a job and they can't get a job. So they're panhandling and they're asking for money, and they find themselves in this cycle again, going back into the system again, and then coming out, going back into the system again and coming out. And it becomes a lifestyle, and they have been relegated to a permanent class of underclass citizenship because they cannot break back into mainstream society and into the middle class.
I really appreciate your focus on reentry and the challenges there. You know, especially someone who's been incarcerated for long periods of time, and then is sort of like they open the prison gates and you're just out. Mm-hmm. Right. And then, as you say, just thinking about, you know, how to even get to, you know, the next location, how to find a job, how to find housing, how to, how to learn all the things that you've, you know, sort of, you know, missed, the technology, et cetera. And I think that those, you know, that we set people up, you know, for tremendous failure by not mm-hmm. helping to reintegrate, you know, people back. And I was, you know, thinking about, you make, such an important point, you know, in your book about our, system that's so retributive and inconsistent with values of forgiveness. And that when somebody, you know, pays their debt to society, right, how do we change the narrative? And, we're this incarceration nation and we're all about punishment. And how do we, you know, change that focus, to forgiveness? Because, you know, and I was really, you know, glad to see that when you were writing your story, that you didn't focus on innocence at the beginning, mm-hmm. right? Because even if, right, somebody had, you know, we all make mistakes, right? People make mistakes. And when you pay for a mistake, right, there should be a way to be kind of welcomed back into the community with dignity. Mm-hmm. And so, I think it's, you know, how do we change this narrative of punishment? And I know that, you know, one of the things you've been focusing on is, you know, using scripture and, you know, our sort of values and our foundational religious values. And I'm wondering, you know, to what extent there's been, you know, traction with this, and whether, you know, that's a way that you think the narrative can change.
Sure. So because I am a theologian and a minister, usually scripture is quite authoritative for me in terms of providing a level of direction and using exemplary examples as to how we ought to be forgiving and more compassionate. And one of the things that I think about is the scripture that says, you know, we all sin and fall short of the glory of God, which I think is synonymous to saying that we all, you know, make mistakes. And I think you just articulated that. But just because you make a mistake shouldn't mean that your life should be over. That we have to find a way to, again, compassionately listen with our ears, but also with our heart. And we may not agree with the crime or the infraction that may have been committed. And of course, those things could be very injurious to those who have been victimized by them. But trying to find a way to open ourselves up to forgive. And one example that I use is, you know, all of us break the law. It's just, we don't all get caught in the same way. You know, I'm sure you drive down 95 or Route 8 or 15 and the speed limit says 65 and you're going 80, 90. And at that speed, you know, you could really do a lot of harm to folks if you were to get into an accident. And the fact that you are breaking the law, if you were caught every single time and you were institutionalized every time and you were given a felony for each time you went absorbently above the speed limit and you were going 120, think about yourself. Do you think that the punishment fits the crime fits the punishment? And you probably will come back and say, no, you think that it's excessive. There are a lot of people that have, you know, are incarcerated for very minor offenses. And there are people who are in there for major offenses. But I think either way, the conversation around forgiveness should be at the fore. And we have to find a better way to acknowledge what was wrong, but once people have paid their debt, to give them a clean slate and an opportunity to move forward with their lives. It's unfair to hold them to a life that they might have transformed from. So I hope I was able to at least answer that a little bit.
Yes, no, thank you. I think that's good sort of sage advice to always sort of keep that in mind, because it's, you know, unfortunately it is often, you know, our culture, it's often hard to forgive. We're almost not, you know, programmed that way from a young age. And so I think that's, you know, that's something to really always keep in mind.
Right. Well, also something to also keep in mind too is that, you know, about 40% of the folks who are incarcerated are experiencing some form of mental illness, and that we have to think differently about, do we incarcerate mental illness or do we treat it? And I think we need to move towards a treatment model opposed to the punitive model that we've used before, and creating more diversion programs and things of that nature as well. And I think that we're not necessarily paying attention to the nuances of the impact that the justice system have on people, especially when you've been in for a long period of time and you're going back to trauma-informed communities. There needs to be a healing process that takes place, not only for the person going back into the community, but also the community members that are responsible for also helping to usher that person back into the community.
Right. We are not a very trauma-informed community as part of the problem, that we, you know, it's something that we have not given enough consideration to, and how that impacts people. And both, you know, trauma before, often people that are involved in the criminal justice system have seen all sorts of, you know, all sorts of trauma, including, you know, just the trauma, you know, that systematic racism brings. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as well as other, you know, forms of trauma. And then of course, once you're incarcerated, you know, there's that trauma, mm-hmm. you know, compounding the situation. So, you know, one of the things is that, you know, I know you mentioned, you know, things that we can do as individuals, and I'm just wondering, and then I want to open it up to others to ask questions, but, you know, is there something as a, you know, this community is sort of trying to take responsibility as a group and to, you know, sort of do something positive. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice for, you know, us as the JCC as a community, as to something that we can do in your kind of call to action.
Sure. You know, I know that engaging the political process is hard for some people. But I think that's a good start as well. Even in your local municipality, or whether it's with your state legislatures, making them aware of the fact that there are people who are returning citizens who may be coming back to your community or a community that's around you, and figuring out what are they doing on a policy level, and sort of holding them accountable for creating policies that's fair, just, and equitable for all communities, regardless of who they are representing. And I think that some of the things that that could be done is helping to also lobby for education for formerly incarcerated individuals. In fact, I mean, it costs about $25,000 a year for a person to be incarcerated. And if you really add that up, that's more than the tuition cost probably for the University of New Haven. In fact, it's cheaper to send them to Yale, I think, than to send them to jail. So we got to start making better investments in terms of educating these individuals as well. When they come out, we know that the more educated people are, the less sort of heinous crimes that they commit against society. The crimes become a little bit more sophisticated in terms of white collar crimes, if we want to talk about that. But in terms of street level crime and violence, it goes down precipitously, like in a very impressive way. So working to probably create educational opportunities for some of your local community colleges, when these folks get out, maybe helping them to get a certificate, advocating for them to get a vocation, that pays dividends in terms of helping them to really get into the workforce. Also, I would say, finding opportunities and ways to work with individuals who may be returning home from prison 6 months to a year before they actually get into the community, to figure out what it is that they're going to need to make them prepared and ready when they enter back into their communities. And sort of, again, you could work with churches, nonprofit organizations that are already doing the work, that already kind of have a blueprint in place, and just providing them with tangible resources that they may need, whether that's, giving backpacks to these organizations with toiletries in them, with a list of employers in the area who might be willing to give them a chance to work, might be, donating a car. Some of these folks, they can drive, but they don't have a vehicle to get to a job. So they might get hired in a municipality that's away from the municipality that they live in. So there are a number of creative things that could be done. Also working with the local housing authority in the area to help them, to provide them with housing, because that's a big issue for a lot of folks. They get out and they can't find housing. And then sometimes they're excommunicated from the communities that they came out of. And then if you live in a place where it's a congregate setting and there's a lot of churches around and a lot of schools around, depending on the infraction of what they went to jail or prison for, especially if it's a sex-related crime, they can't live around a church, they can't live around, a daycare center, they can't live near a church. I mean, it's just so many barriers and impediments, and maybe working with sort of the rural communities, housing authority, and saying, hey, how do we work to really help this person have somewhere to live? Because what we notice is that if people don't have stable housing within 30 days of being released, they're going to go back into the criminal justice system. It's just inevitable. Also, I guess, working, with the healthcare facilities as well, or working with insurance companies to help people to get enrolled in insurance. You'd be surprised when folks get out of prison, they have a whole slew of sometimes medical challenges that they may be aware of or they may not be aware of, and they need treatment, whether that's social, behavioral therapy or treatment, or whether it's a sickness or underlying illness, and they don't have insurance, so they can't go to the hospital. So there are things that some agencies and individuals are actually doing, pairing with agencies that are providing and doing this work. And that's one way. But I think the first way is just really educating yourself of the realities that so many people face that you might not run into or see on a daily basis just by virtue of where you live geographically.
Thank you. This is helping to, sort of educate us and give us some, really good ideas, concrete ideas for going forward. I want to open it up and see if others have questions, things they would like to share or ask.
So I have a question. It's Nancy, and first of all, thank you both. This has been incredibly informative, and it's so good. This really is so good for us to hear and understand better. And I'm saddened to admit that I know very little, and so I have a lot of questions. And really, if I could ask you, can you talk a little bit about what systems in place that did not allow for you to be freed out of jail during that time period, having not been in any way convicted of a crime? I mean, here you are sitting, when I heard that, for 10 months or so in a jail situation, having not been, formally, convicted of anything. Can you talk a little bit about that process? I know very little about the law and when it comes to stuff like that.
Sure. So initially my bail was $1 million, and I don't come from means. my family are just hardworking people, blue collar workers. And, you know, there's no way that they could come up with that kind of bond. So I think we have to look at our bond system as well. You know, those that have money are oftentimes able to bond their way out, and others that don't have money find it much more challenging to bond themselves out. And as we know, when you're behind bars, it's very difficult to fight. And it's difficult to really have access to the outside world that might be able to provide you with some level of support. So here it is that I was institutionalized for a long period of time. My bond was very high. And if you were to do sort of a comparison of my bond with a bond of someone else who have committed a very similar infraction in the same state, the bond price is even a bit different, depending on one's race. And those are things that people don't necessarily look at. It's very subtle, but that's a way in which the system also helped to valorize sort of white supremacy. And I think that racism plays a major role in terms of the treatment that people receive when they are behind bars and when they go through that adjudicatory process. I think one of the things I must mention, however, is that one of my former bosses that I worked for at Public Affairs Consultants, put his own money forward so that I could get out of jail. And though it took a long period of time, towards the end, he put money forward, and I was able to come out. Nonetheless, I was restricted from leaving my particular city, and I couldn't travel, and there were so many restrictions. It was a very painful process, but nonetheless, something I wanted to mention that I didn't mention is that the collateral consequences that I faced was just innumerable. And it wasn't that Yale just automatically opened their doors back and said, oh, hey, your case has been adjudicated in court and you're now able to come back. No, I had to fight tooth and nail to get back in. And not only that, about 20 to 26 newspapers wrote about my arrest, from the Yale Daily News to the Hartford Courant to CNN to the Huffington Post and other newspapers in Tampa, Florida, because I was a well-decorated student and had worked for a former governor and had all of that stuff going on. I was at Yale. So it really made the news. And it was also the age of Barack Obama, where the world experienced for the first time an African-American president. And here it is, you have an African-American young man who at least made a comment or two in former newspapers indicating that he aspired to be the next Barack Obama. So I think that the system also played a role in terms of dirtying me up, if you will. And I had to get out there and fight every day for 8 years for the newspapers to take the articles down. And once I was able to get one newspaper to take it down, and it was very hard, it took about 5 years before that happened, then I was able to use their policy against the other newspapers, and then they started taking it down. But the last newspaper to take it down was Yale, which was surprising because at that time I was also the Associate Director of Admissions, Recruitment and Financial Aid, and the first African-American to hold that position in the history of the institution. You would think that they would have been the first to take it down, but they were the last actually to take the article down. So if you were to do a Google search, you wouldn't find it. But what I can tell you, it created so many barriers to entry. It was hard for me to find employment before being employed by Yale. It was difficult for me to go on a date. Every time I would go on a date, the young lady would ask me, well, tell me a little bit about this arrest story. And I would have to relive it every single time. And it was just traumatic to keep telling that story over and over and over and over again. And I even find today that I still have to tell the story over and over again, because there are people out there who know about the story. And there are people out there who are sophisticated with technology and may have found the story somewhere, have a print of the story or a digital footprint of it. And they ask me about it. I've been able to transcend it, but it's still it's still, I feel that I received some collateral consequences as a result of it.
So Nancy, and I just wanted to add, because that was a great explanation with a lot of, really important points, and just to kind of re-emphasize and highlight that bail reform is just so important. That and this is a perfect example, but the statistics show that when somebody is incarcerated, pre-trial, they're much more likely to take a plea, because they don't, they're not out there, they can't fight. And the system, the punishment, so often it's the punishment of the process, right? It's not even, there's, also these, incredible statistics about how, people of color had their cases dismissed at a much higher rate than white people, which means that they're being falsely accused, right? They're being arrested improperly, and the system is very punishing. Even when you're out, you have to keep coming back to court, right? And the pressure of taking time away from your livelihood, et cetera. But certainly, right, being incarcerated, especially in lower level cases, if you can't make bail, they'll often prosecutors will make a deal and say, okay, so if you take a plea to this charge, you'll get time served. So you can get out, but now you have a criminal record, and that sets you on a path, right? So there's so much of is tied up in the punishment of the process. And so bail reform, there've been these bail funds now where people will contribute to the bail fund, and that has led to more people being willing to, fight their charges, and the charges being dismissed. And so, and just also when, they talk about the, sort of the price of the bail, because even if the judge sets your bail a certain way, you're going to a bail bondsman, right? It's like a loan. And so they've done also research that shows, right, that, somebody who's Black or brown, that the amount that they have to put up as collateral is going to be higher. So it's everything just kind of compounds and builds. So I just wanted to, because I think you made like some just really, important points to keep in mind. There were, so there were two questions in the chat I want to make sure we get to. One about, school resource officers, being in school. And I think this, and how that leads to the, school to prison pipeline. And, also one about, what you do as a pastor, to help people who are coming out of prison. And so I'll let you answer those questions.
Yeah, good. I mean, I think that having school resource officers can be good if those school resource officers are not necessarily dealing with minor disciplinary issues, because students are going to be rambunctious. We all been teenagers, we've all been students. And I think it requires, if we do have school resource officers at the school, that they're interculturally competent, that they also are taking implicit bias training, especially if they are in a minority context and they happen to be from a majority community, and vice versa. If you have an officer who is from a marginalized community, and enforcing rules at a majority school, that officer also is trained and have taken implicit bias training. Because often what we see is the officers who come from especially suburban areas and are on the police force in an urban community tend to deal with conflict a little bit differently. And so I'll use as an example a situation that I witnessed in one of the public schools in Bridgeport. I was called out to the school for a student who is a part of my parish, and the student has ADHD and real deep trauma at home, and the school sort of made aware of it. And a teacher who's from Greenwich told the student, "Hey, have a seat." And the student said, "I don't feel like sitting down." And the teacher said, "Have a seat. You're being insubordinate. And if you don't have a seat, I'm going to call the police." And so instead of calling the principal, the teacher called the police. And when the police came, the police threw the student on the ground, put the handcuffs on the student, walked them out of the school. That's one example of a teacher from a majority community not necessarily being aware of sort of the trauma that that student is coming to school with, and not really understanding that the police deals with conflict and disciplinary issues in a different way. And I'm not sure she anticipated that the officer should have arrested the student, but I do think that she did not take enough time really on trying to find alternative means to deal with the situation, and the police came to mind first. I also witnessed a situation where a African-American teacher was in a classroom dealing with a student, the same situation. And the African-American teacher said, "Young man, have a seat." And he kind of, talked back to her. And she says, "I said, have a seat." And he sat down and he listened. And I was wondering the difference between that teacher and the other teacher. And what I later discovered is that both of those teachers, one of those teachers, the African-American teacher, took the implicit bias training course and had to go through a plethora of courses in order to be brought on as a teacher, and that the other teacher didn't go through that. And what that said to me is that I think that whether you're black, white, or whatever, you need to go through implicit bias so that you are treating students fairly and that you are reporting behavioral issues appropriately. So that's a long story about the police being brought into the school. I think the police needs to be trained and that the principals and the assistant principals and deans should be dealing with disciplinary issues unless it rises to the level of something egregious, a student bringing a weapon on campus or something like that, that you need that level of police intervention. The second question I think you were asking was about my church, things that we do. So we actually have a prison fellowship program at the church. And this prison fellowship program allows folks in our congregation to adopt a formerly incarcerated person and to help mentor them and shadow them. So we assign folks to someone for at least 6 months to a year. We provide them with toiletries. We provide them with ongoing food support. We also provide them with bus tokens for those who might not have sufficient transportation. We also help them write a resume. We help them with the employment search process. We have a database of mom and pop shops and also other businesses that we've developed great relationships with over the years that give these folks an opportunity to at least go to work to provide for their families. We also work very closely with the Housing Authority in the city of Bridgeport and also with the Social Services Department in terms of helping to get people into permanent housing solutions. And we've been very successful in doing that. And then we have a relationship also with Housatonic Community College and some other vocational schools around the area to give people certifications and skill sets to be able to provide for their families and for themselves. So I'm very, very excited about that work and continue to look for extended resources to help with the work that we're doing.
So, I just want to say thank you so much for this conversation, for all the wealth of information you've given us and just for sharing, your own story and experiences with us. Connie, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough. I think this was wonderful, just in terms of, again, your personal story and being able to overcome all of the things that were impediments that were put in front of you, and you just stepped right over them and moved ahead. So that's just admirable at a personal level. And then the degree to which you have educated yourself and gone through the rigorous training, to be a pastor. And then on top of that, now you're going to be an attorney. So I know you will be a fabulous champion for the causes and the people that you're fighting for. And I'm sure that everybody that was lucky enough to be on this program tonight has a deeper understanding of the issues and the problems and the degree to which they impact on everyone's lives, as you pointed out. And you've given us very concrete steps and things that we can do, which doesn't necessarily happen a lot of times. You know, people will talk, you know, in flowery ways, but not have, well, this is what you actually can do. So I have to thank you so much for that. This was just terrific. And I'm so pleased that you were able to join us. And I hope we'll hear from you again at some point. You know, we would love to have you to join us for that. And I just want to thank everybody who was here. I'm going to mention one event that we're having, Arts and Culture is doing, which is going to be on Sunday, June 13th at 11:30 a.m. in the morning. We're having a live virtual tour at the for the highlights tour at the newly renovated Museum of the Jewish People at Beit HaTfutzot in Tel Aviv. So it promises to be wonderful, and I hope that some of you will be able to join us. There's lots going on at the JCC in June, and so I invite you to look at our website, check us out on Facebook, and join us whenever you can. Thank you all so much. Good night.